What's going on, everybody? Charlie here with Pondering Christianity, and today I wanted to make a video basically discussing why I want to go further into near-death experiences, what I think we can learn from them, what benefits I think that we can reap as a community, not only as a Christian community, but as an agnostic or an atheist community. I think that there's a lot of information available in near-death experiences that we really can pull from and grow a lot. So what I want to do is kind of take some time today and make this video to talk to you guys about why I think it's so beneficial, and hopefully get you onto the point where you guys can see, while there's a lot of potential to move into here. So I don't want to make a super long video, but I do want to take that time to kind of elaborate on each of those points and let you guys kind of come along with me in this journey and understand kind of what the goal and ultimately what I want to achieve with this is. So that being said, let's do this. I'm gonna actually go ahead and bring up my little presentation here I got for you guys. So first off, what inspired me? Okay, what inspired me to want to look into near-death experiences? This book right here, Imagine Heaven by John Burke. I'll have to check. I can't remember off the top of my head. I think this book was written in 2015 or 14. But essentially in this book, John Burke covers a lot of what we have learned from near-death experiences. And he does a really compelling fashion of not only describing biblically kind of how people's accounts line up with what we've seen in the Bible, but it also lines up with what we've heard experts also talk about within regards to the medical evidence for near-death experiences. And so he takes a very comprehensive approach to, what does the Bible have to say about it? What do doctors and professionals have to say about it? And he really creates a wonderful, well-written book on the overall near-death experience. Now, the thing that I thought was intriguing was the fact that compared to all of the other fields of apologetics that I've studied, this field seems to be one of the most uncharted, meaning that all these other fields seem to have lots and lots of resources on them and experts in them, and near-death experiences don't seem to have that, which is something of interest, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later on in the video. But ultimately, I think that it is something of note to think, like, why isn't that the case? But like I said, we'll get into that a little bit more further into the video. But that's what ultimately inspired me, was that, in addition to the fact that, Gary Habermas, who, if you're not familiar with Gary Habermas, he's a famous resurrection expert. Him and Mike Lycona are definitely two of my favorite resources when it comes to checking into those things. And Gary Habermas said that the thing he had studied right behind the resurrection, the thing he had studied the most behind the resurrection. Gary Habermas has done a lot of studying on the resurrection, let me tell you. The second thing he had studied the most was NDEs, near-death experiences. And that floored me, because of the fact that I was like, man, Gary Habermas, right? This guy who spent his entire life researching the resurrection and the historical accuracy and legitimacy of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The second thing he studied the most of is NDEs. I did not expect an answer out of him. I expected perhaps something along the cosmological lines, maybe talking about a variation of the Kalam cosmological argument or the teleological arguments, but not really expecting him to say near-death experiences. And so that kind of really piqued my curiosity as to what would get a man like Gary Habermas so excited and so interested in study that he would pick up that topic behind what he considered obviously paramount, which is Jesus Christ's resurrection. So those were kind of the things that were the catalyst that got me going. And then I would say the nail in the coffin, and shout out to Mike Winger if he watches this video. He was loving enough and kind enough to kind of have a conversation with me about apologetics on YouTube and what's the best approach and what helps and what doesn't, et cetera, et cetera. And we were talking about kind of one of the things to do is, especially if you want to work with other YouTubers. And I love to network. I love talking with people, meeting with people, and building those relationships. And so, I would love to be able to work with these other guys on their channels. And one of the things that Mike had mentioned to me was the fact that, we're all kind of, all the YouTubers have a general understanding of apologetics, but it's really getting into the specifics of a particular topic that really helps everyone kind of work together and have interesting stuff. And that's ultimately what we want to do, is create an interesting conversation online that keeps people engaged and interested, enough to continue to consume the content and grow, right? Because if it's not engaging, right, if it's boring, it doesn't matter how beneficial it is, the message won't get relayed. So it's got to be entertaining. It's got to be something of note. And so you want fresh content for that matter. And so, he was kind of saying, what's a specific area that you think you'd like to specialize in? And so, I was thinking about it, and I was like, honestly, I'm such a jump all over kind of guy that I like to just look into all these other fields. But in this particular thing, I felt called in that moment, and just still to this day love studying it. And it was just near-death experiences. I was like, these are the one thing that I could see myself reading a lot on. And so that kind of was like, and he was like, yeah, I think that that's an excellent topic. And I think that near-death experiences have a lot of theological questions, which is the study of God, have a lot of theological questions that need to be answered. For example, why do atheists go to heaven, right? Like that's a very interesting question. Why do Buddhists? Why do Muslims? Why are these people who are dying from different cultures, different beliefs, different upbringings, different parts of the world? Why are these people experiencing heaven? And so from a Christian framework, that creates a lot of interesting questions. It's not like, I would hope that no Christian looks at it and says, "Oh, these people don't deserve heaven," because if that's the case, I would say that you need to reevaluate the heart of the Christian message, because it seems like you missed it. It's that none of us deserve heaven. So the fact that any of us go is honestly a blessing and a gift from God. So just my little footnote on that. But I think it's of significant interest for us to figure out exactly why this is happening, because I think there's so much beneficial things to learn from that. Of what is God trying to tell us? What are we missing? What can we learn more of? And so, are what these people saying consistent with the Bible? Does it create a cohesive picture? And that's something Ravi Zacharias talked about. The late Ravi Zacharias talked about in a lot, was the fact that answers needed to be cohesive and coherent. They needed to be relevant to one another. They needed to stack on top of one another in terms of validity, and that they could be independently answered. But ultimately, when you put all those questions together of origin, meaning, morality, and destiny, that you would come to a coherent explanation that would have all of them agreeing with one another, instead of saying, two of the four agree and the other two disagree. So that's something that I want to be able to shine more light on, is show that if the Bible is true and people are having these near-death experiences, and we'll get into what that is exactly here soon, but if they're having it, then what they should be experiencing should have a level of consistency within the Bible. For the record, the biblical text on death experiences and precisely what happens after you die isn't exactly straightforward. It wasn't necessarily a concern of the biblical writers. But I believe that there is some stuff in there. It just takes some study, reading, and there are little things here and there that I think are really interesting. And I'm looking forward to taking you guys through that. So that's what inspired me. All right, what are NDEs and why do they matter? All right, so NDEs are defined by Google, and I used the Google definition here, so you guys know. Like, I use the Google definition here because that's pretty much what most people will use to define that, and I found it to be adequate in terms of its defining experience. And there's actually a few things in the definition that I'll talk about real quick. So first off, NDEs as defined by Google, an unusual experience, I italicized that for a reason, taking place on the brink of death and recounted by a person after recovery, typically an out-of-body experience or vision of a tunnel of light. Okay, so An unusual experience. I wanted to italicize that because I wanted to point out to the fact that it's not like there's a lot of people having near-death experiences and then there's this unusual crop of experiences that's happening and they're calling those unusual experiences. That's not what it's saying. What it's saying is that the experience itself is unusual, and it typically is associated with an NDE. So if you have an NDE, it's an unusual experience, period. So I wanted to make that very clear, that it wasn't saying that there was a specialty crop of near-death people who had near-death experiences and some of them were considered unusual, and those are the ones that you read about. It's more so that people are having near-death experiences and those in general are unusual in the way that they're described. So if that I hope that makes sense. But bear that in mind. Okay, so why is it relevant? Well, this is the biggest piece to me. Why is it relevant? Well, it's relevant because of, obviously, I've heard Gary Habermas kind of make this joke about it, and so I'll kind of extend this to you guys here, that he's heard skeptics refer to heaven and hell, but heaven specifically is Narnia, right? And that's kind of if you guys aren't familiar with C.S. Lewis, he's the writer of the Chronicles of Narnia, and he was a famous Christian apologist. And obviously, Narnia was the kingdom in which the fantasy world in which he had built the Chronicles of Narnia. And it was kind of like it's kind of like a double jab at C.S. Lewis, and it's all made up, and Narnia is just this mythical fictional place, and heaven might as well be called Narnia because it's not real. So that's why it's funny, because Gary Habermas makes the statement that people are going to Narnia and coming back and saying that it's real. So that's why that's of note, I think. But that being said, people are going to Narnia, experiencing it, and coming back. And I've seen variations in different reports of different studies. And so I just wanted to kind of give you guys the low end and the high end of what I've seen, because either way, I think it's a high number and it's really relevant. 1 in 20 to 1 in 5 experience near-death experiences and just simply don't talk about it. That's a lot of people, okay? 1 in 20 of the world's population is all of the United States. That means every single person in the United States that you encounter had died and had some type of experience in that period of death and then came back to life. And so, that's of note, I think. And that's in the 1 in 20. If you do 1 in 5, that means 20% of the world's population has experienced a near-death experience, which is over 1 billion people. That's a lot of people, okay? And so I was talking to someone the other day, and they said, well, we just can't know. We just can't know with near-death experiences because they're one-sided. They're one-sided. Well, here's my rebuttal to this, okay? If 7 million, right? Well, I'm going to just say 7 million. This is a very low number compared to what's actually out there. If 7 million people went somewhere and just came back and described that, okay, we can't go to that place to validate ourselves, right? But if you had 7 million eyewitness testimonies, and these 7 million eyewitness testimonies had consistency, okay, and we're talking about consistency in like what you would see in kind of like a court case of multiple eyewitnesses. That's what my definition of consistency would be. You would find that a reliable account, or at least I would say that that's a reliable account. And if it isn't, then I would ask you if your question of consistency, or if your question of reliability, is a reasonable one. Because if 7 million eyewitness testimonies that agree with one another tell you something, and then you just say, well, we simply can't know because we can't go there and verify ourselves, or scientifically the information is unclear, I would say, look, I think that you're placing the standard quite high. But that being said, I do understand the level of skepticism necessary to look into it, and that's why it's going to be included into the areas of research that I do, specifically the medical research, because I want to know. I want to know, is this a big, a lot of people have been fooled in the past, and so is this just a big facade that people are buying into? Questions to know. All right. So that's why I think it's of great interest. And then I had to do a little shameless plug there of my channel, Pondering Christianity. That's going to be where I upload the videos. And what I'm going to do for you guys is I'm going to chronicle through each of the books that I'm reading. I'm going to do it for myself and for you. Myself, for the reasons of, if I forget what I said or thought of that book, it'll be helpful for me to go back and watch the video of my notes on it. So it's kind of like a visual note-taking for me kind of session. So it'll be a good chance for me to kind of go back and be like, oh, I forgot that was something of relevance in that book that I really was interested by. And I can, that happens when you read a ton of books on a particular topic or a ton of books in general. I find myself forgetting things I learned, 20 books back all the time. So it would be nice to be able to go back and watch a 5-minute video and just download myself up on all the notes that I had of interest. So, and in addition to that, I'm curious to see, personally, I'm curious to see how my positions change and how my stance on near-death experiences matures over time, and kind of what I initially believe or initially I think, or those type of things, and then seeing how those grow and flower over time and turn into something more in depth and beautiful and comprehensive. So I'm excited to see that. So that's personally something I'm really excited about for myself. But I think for you guys, it'll be really cool to see, step by step how I've got to the point. And ultimately, if you really want to go through the whole thing and see kind of where I land at the end of it, I'm not totally sure what eventually I want to do with all the compilation of information. I would be interested in writing a book specifically looking at the theological implications of near-death experiences. But ultimately, there's a lot of things I think we can learn from them. And that's just one that I think is a pressing question. As a matter of fact, my father, who's a Baptist preacher, if you guys don't know my father, he's an old Baptist minister, Southern Baptist. And if you know what that is, you know they're a little more stubborn of a denomination. And so he believes that near-death experiences are visions from demons. They're not actually, these people aren't actually experiencing heaven. And he points to the verse. You'll have to forgive me, I can't think of its location off the top of my head, but it basically says, "It is appointed once to man to die, and then to be judged, and then the judgment." I think it's in Romans. I might be wrong there. I have a feeling I'm wrong there, so don't quote me on that, okay? But basically in this verse, he's talking about the fact that men die once, and then from there they have their judgment, where they're sent to either heaven or hell. And near-death experiences are obviously flying in the face of that verse, or are they? Right? Question. Saying, okay, I died, I experienced heaven, or I experienced hell, I came back, I got a second chance at life. Now that I know it's real, I'm going to live totally different. And that's exactly what you see happen. You see people, you see atheists, you see different Muslim beliefs, you see Buddhists, you see agnostics, you see all these varying beliefs die, go experience hell or heaven. And both of those are such a jolting experience that when they come back to this earth, they have a whole new perspective on things. And that's really intriguing. At least I think so. Okay, so that's something of interest. All right. Questions to be answered. Is there biblical text to support near-death experiences? Right. So that's kind of that's one of the big kickers with near-death experiences, is that do we have biblical verses that describe a near-death experience, discuss the near-death experience to any capacity or any depth for us to know kind of what the process would be, to have kind of like a system to compare other near-death experiences to. Is it there? Are those questions there? Is there descriptions of that? I think that there are, but I'd like to provide very strong points on that. Okay. 2, is there medical evidence supporting an out-of-body experience? All right. Is there medical evidence supporting an out-of-body experience? This is a pressing question for obvious reasons if this is all just a facade and these people are just experiencing an extreme high release of some kind of drug or some kind of, I don't know what to describe it as, but basically a near-death experience could be just a release of very powerful chemicals in the human system. It creates a vision of a dying brain, and then it's all over, because none of these people were dead for 24 hours, at least from what I've seen so far. Most of the near-death experiences I've seen are anywhere from 5 to 90 minutes is the longest one I can think of off the top of my head. So, that there's a lot of medical room there. So that's going to be something I have to spend time looking into and ensuring that, what is the transition period of death? When is that happening? When is it acceptable to deem someone as dead? When is it not? And are there any chemical reactions going on that can account for the experiences these people are having? And are they reasonable explanations, or are they grasping at straws? All right. Right. What are people experiencing, and is it coherent with any kind of worldview? Multiple worldviews. This is of importance, obviously. I mean, if near-death experiences are happening, Christianity isn't the only religious system that has an explanation for them. There's plenty of other worldviews that do. So that's going to be a pressing question for the reason of, like, how do we know that Christianity got it right and perhaps, Hinduism didn't get it right, or Buddhism didn't get it right? How do we know it's not just some kind of karmic state? How do we know it's not, how do we know that Islam is incorrect and in its explanation of near-death experiences or death experience in general? Is it coherent with what's going on in that? So in the Quran. So those are things I think are really good questions for obvious reasons of we can't just have a near-death experience, say it's real, and then say that Christianity has the monopoly on it. We have to look at the evidence to say, okay, do these experiences co-align with the Christian worldview, and do they provide evidence as to why the Christian worldview would be the only explanation as to why they're happening the way they are? All right. Next. Are the conversations people having helping us understand God? What I mean by that specifically is when people die and have a near-death experiences, one of the stages in most of these near-death experiences is something called the life review. So the life review is essentially where you get to meet up with Jesus and some angels, and that varies on how many angels show up. Some accounts have 2, 1, some have 12. So it's a variation. But essentially they go through your life with you and talk about that. Those conversations that people are actually having with Jesus, some people actually ask incredibly deep philosophical questions and get profoundly interesting answers. So those questions and answers, if they're actually happening, right, which I am operating from the sense that they are, right, and looking to prove that, then there is some really cool information that we can pull from those conversations. And honestly, a great amount of hope, love, and insight can be garnered from those conversations, and ultimately helping us refine and improve our theology. From what I've seen so far, I'll just say a quick note on this. From what I've seen so far, they do not fly in the face of anything that we have whatsoever. Our current theology is good. It is actually very good. And from what people are getting in near-death experiences, what Jesus tells them in these near-death experiences is simply refining what they understand, and it's very coherent with what you would find in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, in terms of answers that Jesus would give. So it's a really cool. I just finished My Descent into Death by Howard Storm, and it's a great book, man. It's a great book. It's a cool book to read for so many different reasons. So yeah, if you get the chance, check that one out. All right. Well, at least my next question here. Why haven't these been taken more seriously up to this point? This is a question I really have no idea where to get started with, but I am going to look to answer it. I think that a lot of people have a tendency to write off near-death experiences. I think Christians have a tendency to write off near-death experiences for the reasons I mentioned before. They see those verses that says, it's appointed to man once to die and then to be judged and then the judgment. I think that creates a finality in the thinking for people of saying, look, this is the end of it. Like, that's, you die and then once and then that happens. And that's not to say that near-death experiences don't kind of, I understand why there's controversy between those two. I do. I just think that's another video for a different time. But ultimately, I think that the conversation sits at, why can't we get these near-death experiences to be a serious contributor to what we know? And I think that if we can get to that point, then we would gain a lot of benefit from it. But there is the question of, there's been a lot of really smart people here before me, obviously, who've looked into it. And from my understanding, near-death experience research really started kicking off in the mid-'70s to early '80s So that's something of saying, in regards to academic study, that's not a very long time. That's a fairly new study. So, 60 years, 50 years of research is going to provide us some interesting information and answers. So I'm thinking it might be just a good time now for this information to kind of come to the forefront and begin a really good conversation on all this stuff and why it's happening. All right. Okay. And then finally, one of the final questions: what beauty awaits us in heaven, and what horrors in hell, if they exist? And I like how I spelled exist there. So the thing about that, right, is what beauties await us in heaven and what horrors in hell. That's probably the main motivator for why I think Christians look into near-death experiences, because, we want to peek over the fence, as it were, right? We want, let me see over. Oh, okay. That's what I thought it was going to be, right? So I think that there's a lot to be gained from that, and a lot of hope, honestly, to see kind of what awaits us in heaven, and how our understanding of heaven is so primitive. It's just, honestly, it's just, it's like someone asks you what's Six Flags like, and you go, there's some cool stuff there. It's like, no, that doesn't do the experience justice. You just can't capture it. And honestly, it's really difficult to describe in words what it's like to go on a roller coaster to someone, right? For some people it'd be terrifying, but for me, I love those kind of things. I love roller coasters, so it's difficult to explain how awesome a roller coaster is to somebody. Sometimes it's just so much easier to just strap them in and say, look, just experience it. Okay, the experiential explanations of heaven are going to far exceed what we can write about it. So just something to bear in mind. But honestly, I think that it is of note to find out more about what it's like in heaven, because I think a lot of people think it's boring, and they're like, I don't want to spend eternity worshiping God, which I wouldn't either. To be honest with you, I wouldn't either. And that's something I got to applaud John Burke for in his book Imagine Heaven, is he kind of goes after that mentality of like, if you only knew what awaited you in heaven, you would not feel that way. You would not feel that way whatsoever. And the same thing goes for hell. If people kind of joke about, save me a seat in hell, and do this and that, and they'll joke about it, and like, I'll see you in hell. And now, after studying it more and more, originally before I was just kind of like, yeah, that's funny. Yeah, you don't care about going to hell. It's not a big deal. But now, after studying it, you can see why it's such a traumatic experience for people. And that actually leads me into another really good note of this, and that is why, to go back to the previous point, 1 in 20, 1 in 5 experience near-death experiences and just simply don't talk about it. Why? Why don't they talk about it? Well, here's why. Okay? Here's why. If you die and you go to heaven, the experience you have in heaven is so profound and so beyond this world that when you come back and describe it to someone, it sounds like a circus. It doesn't even sound real because it sounds so awesome. People speak telepathically. People are able to feel one another's emotion. There's no longer a barrier there. They're able to move via thought. They can move slowly. You can just teleport where you want to go. You're experiencing so much learning so quickly, and it's just such an elevated sense of reality that when you come back to Earth and you describe it to other people, literally the accounts that I've read literally say that people just laugh at them. People just laugh at them, and they'll come back and say, it's all about love. God is love. But that's been a rhetoric for so long now that I think people just write it off, and they're like, oh yeah, God is love. We get it, right? It's just such an easy thing to write off. It's such a common rhetoric. So I think that that in conjunction with hell. And let's talk about hell for a second. Hell, the experiences that people have when they go to hell is far and beyond traumatizing. Anything that this world could ever traumatize you with is nothing compared to what hell has done to people. And they come back so distraught from this experience that, of course, they don't want to talk about it, right? Like, you don't see people lining up the block to talk about their PTSD, right? we have to coerce these people, support them, constantly tell them like, look, you got to talk about it. You got to talk about it. You got to talk about it, to get these people to talk about PTSD, to talk about traumatic experiences that happened in their past. And they're not quick to share that, right? You have to earn someone's trust for them to tell you about the sexual abuse that they received as a child, or the fact that they were beaten, or the experience they had in war, or any of these traumatic experiences people will have here on earth. You need to build a relationship with that person for them to trust you enough in order to tell you about those things. And so, of course, people aren't going to go to hell and come back and be like, let me tell you about my visit to hell. Like, first off, no one takes them seriously. Second off, if they're talking to someone who doesn't know where they stand spiritually wise, then they're not going to take the conversation serious to begin with. I mean, if you doubt the existence of hell, right? Like, how receptive will you be of my experience in hell? Right? It would be difficult. You need the foundation of agreeing that hell exists. So to go back to my analogy earlier of Six Flags, if you don't believe Six Flags exists and I'm trying to tell you about how awesome Six Flags is, it's going to be kind of hard to relay or how terrible it was. Either way, it's going to be hard to relay the experience I had at the place when you doubt the place exists. So I think that that's really an interesting component, and I want to learn more about that, of how we can make these people feel more at ease with these conversations and these topics, because I just think there's so much more information out there that we're missing just simply because people don't feel comfortable revealing it. So yeah, if you know anyone, and this is kind of my ask to you guys, if you know anyone that's had a near-death experience and they don't feel comfortable talking to someone about it, I will be more than happy to have a conversation with them about it. I believe hell exists. I believe heaven exists, clearly. So, and I'm studying these people's experiences, and the more people I can talk to about it, the better. I wanna learn. I wanna talk to them about their experience, their interpretation of the experience, and that's something we can talk about at a different time. But that those things I'm interested in, and if you are watching this and you've had a near-death experience, please reach out. I would be happy to have a conversation with you, and learn from you, and learn from what kind of experience you had. And also know that I will have to have a level of skepticism with it, but it won't be a level of skepticism of judging it. It will be a level of skepticism to ensure that what we're getting out of the experience is something that can be validated by other means. But nonetheless, please, by all means, I would love to have a conversation with you about it. Okay, so that answers those questions, or questions to be answered. Why is this relevant to apologetics? # because materialism. Yeah. So if near-death experiences are happening, these are out-of-body experiences that aren't explainable by material explanation. That would mean that supernatural is very much in play. And of course, there are a lot of really great arguments already out there for supernatural existence, and the fact that it intercedes with our day-to-day life in our world. By all means, I'm 100% in support of those, but I think that we can always have more explanations, right? At the end of the day, it's like I want to have as many as we can, because there might be one more that we could add to get one more soul, to get one more person who's able to accept Christ as their Lord and Savior, and experience heaven and not hell. So that to me is why I push into this, and why I want to have this conversation, and why I wanted to contribute to the apologetic arena, because again, this is an arena where there's conversations between what's reality, what's not reality, how do things actually work, and if we can prove supernatural explanations exist and are real and concrete, and near-death experiences can provide more evidence to that. I don't think we're ever going to get there where we get everyone convinced, but we are going to be able to get to a point where we can convince a little bit more than we previously would have been able to. And that brings me to a real quick story. My wife, right? So when I first got into apologetics, right, I'm a self-study guy. I didn't go to school for this. I went to school for a lot of other things, not this. So when I got into apologetics, I was just a guy watching YouTube and having questions myself and looking for answers. And to come to find out, there were some really great teachers out there with great answers. And as I started kind of getting into it and ultimately decided like this was going to be something I wanted to do, I wanted to to be a person who could answer these questions, not only for myself, but for other people. And I bought my first stack of apologetic books. And as I started going through them, my wife, Allie, I was telling her about all these things I was learning from the books. And, she was originally kind of agnostic. And then she kind of moved into like a babe in Christ, if you would. And now she's growing in her faith. But she originally was just not super convinced by them. She wasn't really like into the logical side of the arguments that were being detailed within these books, versus I was eating them up. And I think Imagine Heaven was the 8th book I read in that initial stack. And by that point I had already read like William Lane Craig, Frank Turek, Ravi Zacharias, Norman Geisler, Lee Strobel, all these different apologists. And so I'm going through Imagine Heaven, and I was talking to her about each of these books as I was reading through them, and how cool it was to kind of obviously learn them. And she was like, I got probably halfway through Imagine Heaven, and she was like, that book is the most compelling book you've read so far. And I was just blown away by that. I was blown away by that because the book had a lot of people talking about their experience of heaven and how that touches people, how that connects with people is so cool. It's such a cool thing to me. And that was a big inspiration for me, a big moment for me of saying, man, like if I could get better at this, if I could learn more about this to the point where I could answer all the skeptics' questions on the topic, and use it as a form of conversation to get someone interested in the message of what God has for you, that would be really cool. And that's kind of one of the original inspirations that I'm it's coming back to me now, right? That was something of note for me, and just a really cool opportunity to say, like, that's near-death experience. It worked for my wife. Why can't it work for other people? Of, helping bring them closer to God and ultimately adding validity to what it is they're experiencing. And my experience so far of talking about it with other people has been that when you start talking about near-death experiences, people listen. People stop and listen, because that is something of serious note of saying this person died. You can go meet them. You can go verify them. You can't just write them off. I mean, you can hear their testimony and then say, okay, well, I don't really trust that. But at the end of the day, like this is a current day form of apologetics that's verifiable right now. So that's really what excites me about it. And materialism has a really difficult time, obviously, explaining the supernatural, or maybe it doesn't. I don't know. Maybe I need to go listen to some more materialists try to describe that. But I think it would be really, really hard for a materialist to defend that, at least legitimately, anyway. So yeah, I'm excited for this and what it can do for apologetics. Now, that being said, guys, I don't know how long this video turned out to be, but that is the end of it. Near-death experiences, that's where it's all at. I really appreciate if you stuck around for this whole video. Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate that. And I'm excited to see what it does. I'm excited to see where it goes. I'm excited to see what I can learn and see what I can bring to the table for you guys and have some great conversation. And if you have questions that you think near-death experiences might be able to answer, then let me know. And I will do what I can to add it to my list of things that I want to answer through the research. So yeah, if you guys enjoyed this video, give it a like, subscribe, be on the lookout for more content, and keep on pondering. I'll see you guys on the other side.